Hi folks, welcome to class 10 of International NGOs, and here we are with some insights on migration and INGOs. And with this session, I hope to give you a better perspective of how NGOs are dealing with issues of migration and or forced migration using one example of an INGO, and also what are the challenges before them, both legal as well as financial, and how are they working with their partners or in some cases the partners turning adversaries. Now, take a few minutes to think of some NGOs that work in this space, list down some of the strategies that you think they've used, and what has been effective from your perspective, what has worked, what hasn't. Pause this video if you want and write down these key points and analyze them as we go along. Now, I've assigned Christensen and Ibrahim and Christensen's reading, which is basically reading a case study of an immigrant serving NGO. However, the idea there is they're looking at accountability of who are they accountable to, and the reason I assigned this was to help you build on the previous article on accountability and also to contextualize it in the case of an immigrant serving organization, and to really help understand that accountability in this case is to people directly who are being impacted. I think that's the point they're trying to drive, that these sorts of organizations should be accountable to the people that they serve rather than purely to donors or others. So that's essentially their point, and they say this can be done by investing in internal grantee capacity for lateral communication rather than just upward accountability, that is accountability to donors. Now, switching gears a little bit, I want us to focus a little bit on the two broad perspectives of migration in the US, which most of you are familiar with, the progressive and the conservative point. So the progressive point essentially says that migrants have built this country, they renew American democracy by bringing new energy, new ideas, new perspectives. And of course, libertarians would argue that they also build companies, they start new ventures, increase employment, yada, yada, yada. So all those arguments exist. And as I pointed out in the last class, 1965 is a turning point really with the Hart-Celler Act. And in the case of refugees, it's 1980 with the Refugee Act. So look up those two acts for some context. And also look up the book that I mentioned called American Mythos, which is an excellent book on understanding the myths of migration, and where Robert Wood now says the US is considered a land of opportunities. And he says we need to better examine where these myths are coming from. The conservative side of the argument is fairly well known, I'm assuming, to most of you, where there's a greater call for putting restrictions on migration and sort of protecting the American way, which is defined in sometimes fairly narrow terms, meaning people who are only from Europe. I mean, migration should be only from Europe or Asia. I mean, pre-1965 ideas, essentially saying non-Europeans, people of non-European descent are not able to assimilate, and etc., etc. So I included this chart, which has been shown earlier, to basically talk a little about the how much migration is a part of philanthropy as well. So look at the remittances, one column, which actually accounts for about $108 billion annually. So even in the foundations, billions of dollars are given to issues on migration, and also universities and colleges also actually, including religious institutions, they support migration issues quite a bit. So it is a fairly important sector, even if you look at the numbers in terms of monies given. So I want us to focus a little bit about the current debates and discourses on migration in the US. So here are some key points that I've listed. Migration from Central America is a hot button issue, with the former President Obama trying to push through some reforms, but unfortunately they didn't go too far in terms of making either those DACA and DAPA folks who are here, giving them any sort of permanent status. The majority consensus seems to be that they should be, either given green cards, permanent residency, or some such thing. But that hasn't happened, or even citizenship in some cases. So, of course, with this administration, things are not going to be easy. And also related to that is the undocumented workers from Mexico, and essentially Mexico is the stop point for a lot of people coming from Central America. And as most of you would have followed the refugee resettlement process and the travel ban related debates that are still ongoing in the US, so that's something that has created a sense of urgency or anxiety around these issues. And all of this, you could say, is related to post 9/11 anxieties that have persisted in the US related to security issues and whatnot. So, and that you could say is coming from a space of increased anxiety among uh, hardcore conservatives who believe that there is a dramatic rise of non-white population in the US. So there is a very racially led debate. The whole space is unfortunately riddled with uh, debates and propaganda around race. Much of it is untrue, but if you look at the facts and look at your sources carefully, I think there is some sense to be made of all the noise that's coming out of DC, or even local level politics. So I would urge you to refer academic sources first for more accurate information, and then go to think tanks and media, and not just look up numbers or ideas from random blogs or other sources, which usually can be propaganda and not really factual. So I want us to talk a little about what role are INGOs playing in America of today. So let's look at an organization like the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, which I have mentioned several times during this class. So they do all of the things that I've mentioned here: advocacy, policy research, lobbying the Congress, and actual resettlement process itself. And being a faith-based organization themselves, they work with other faith-based partners across the Christians, American Muslim organizations, and others to also offer support to the people who are coming in. They have a fantastic grassroots network around the country, so there is that element of support as well. Here's an email I received not too long ago from Hayes, drawing a parallel between the fact that Jews were turned away from the US in 1939 and sent back to Nazi Europe, where I'm assuming most of them died, to the ongoing sort of Syrian refugee crisis, where, with the travel ban and, of course, the ban on refugee resettlement, there has been a refusal to accept those people to the US. So strong parallels there. And they're coming from the place saying, okay, we can't do this to people. This has happened in the past. We can't let this happen again. Here's a shameless plug I wrote this piece for the conversation here, talking essentially about removing legal restrictions on sending money to certain countries, which are either war ravaged or are struggling through famine and other crisis situations. So the key argument here is essentially that anti-terror rules are blocking genuine aid to people and impacting their lives. So I've called for lifting sanctions based on a lot of research, and so there's something called the Charity and Security Network Group in Washington D.C. You should look them up. So their reports are quite strong on this. So is the Hudson Institute report. They also talked about this issue when that report was launched, which we discussed during our philanthropy session. So I hope you've read all of this material, and I hope you enjoyed it. I'm hoping to discuss this with some of you, and see you on Tuesday. Have a good weekend.